Well, good evening, everyone. My name's John Hybush. I have the honor of being the executive director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation, and I want to thank everyone for coming out this evening. In honor of our men and women in uniform who defend our freedom around the world, if you would please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. Before we get started this evening, there's just one special guest we have with us tonight. I just want to recognize briefly Dennis Weber, the mayor of Agoura Hills. Dennis, thanks for coming along. Now, before I invite our special guest on stage to interview about his new book, I want to make sure I introduce him in the context of a few important facts, one's important enough to share with you today. First, the Reagan Foundation and Library invited Brad Thor for several reasons, only one of which is the fact that he is the most talented thriller writer in America. His now 17 books, all of them bestsellers, and many of them #1 bestsellers, qualify him to take the stage, any stage in this country, as America's favorite author. It's a fitting title that he earned through the media several years ago. His newest bestseller, Use of Force, the book that he and I will be talking about in just a minute, is already fast climbing the charts. I'll let Brad tell you just where it sits today already. It's pretty exciting. And everyone here who's had the adrenaline rush of chasing along with Scot Harvath over the years understands why Brad is as successful as he is. But you should know that we chase Brad to come and speak here just about every year at every turn, quite simply because of another fact. Like Ronald Reagan, Brad Thor defines what it means to be a great American. A successful writer indeed, but also, like President Reagan, Brad Thor is a patriot above all. One need not read too deeply between the lines of his writings to know that his love of country is second to none. He's volunteered a great deal of his time over the years helping leaders in our government tackle the scourge of terrorism. He also helps personalities in our media determine how to responsibly report on it. It's Brad's imagination, the same one that has produced so many incredible books, that has put experts to work studying how to defend our nation's citizens against homegrown extremists and foreign terrorists. Brad is also generous to a fault, most especially to our nation's fighting men and women who put their lives on the line for our safety and our freedom every day. Many of you know our good friend and neighbor, a close friend of Mrs. Reagan's, Gary Sinise. Brad's generosity to Gary's foundation, to the USO, to the disabled veterans, the wounded warriors, and many others has really set a shining example for others to follow, and they have. His dedication to getting it right and realistic. For example, he's embedded himself with our troops, our special forces in Afghanistan, not only brings the nature of war and espionage and terror more alive in his writings for all of us, but I sense that his willingness to put himself in harm's way has often also been an avenue to pay homage to the sacrifice of our troops. And speaking of generosity, I could not live with myself if I did not mention how generous Brad has been personally to me. Earlier this year, I was lucky enough, I guess, to get Simon & Schuster, coincidentally Brad's same publisher, to consider my own first novel. Brad could not have been more helpful, more gracious, and more professional in supporting me along the way, and I just want to thank him publicly for everything he's done. I know I'll be taking the stage today with a very kind and selfless man. So with that, if you would, please join me in welcoming for a conversation on stage at the Reagan Library, Mr. Brad Thor.
Thank you for that
Thanks, Brad.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. And thank you for such a lovely introduction, John. That was very nice.
It's just so great to have you here, Brad.
It's my pleasure. I always say coming here is like going to Mecca for me. This is really my place. And talk about a shining city on a hill. This is a shining, lovely library on a hill. And I don't know if anybody's mentioned to you, but it's a very special anniversary today, too, isn't it?
It is.
So it is the anniversary of First Lady Nancy Reagan's birth. So this is a very special night to be here. Was it 96 or 94, the anniversary?
Oh, the 100th anniversary?
No, for Nancy, for her birth.
Oh, okay, 94.
94.
That's
so
right.
94 years ago today.
Yeah, neat. And Brad and I had a chance to spend a few minutes at the President and Mrs. Reagan's gravesite just outside. If you haven't done that, it's a real treat, so I invite you to. You know, when I was writing questions to ask Brad, I actually got very excited because having read a number of his books, a number of questions came to my mind. I thought, I really do want to know the answer to this. So, and I hope that shows in what I ask. And when I finish with my own questions, I know we'll have some time, and we're going to make sure we throw it out to you at the audience to ask your own questions. All we ask is that when we do so, you wait till we put a microphone in your hands for you to ask the question, because you're on television and we want to make sure we can hear you. Okay, Brad, it seems now what's happening is it's been happening for well over 10, 12 years, but you're writing one bestseller a year. And I know a lot of people must be curious about your writing process. You know, how is it possible for you to so consistently churn out one successful book after another? Do you just like chain yourself to a desk and stay there for 3 months and say, I'm not leaving till I'm finished, or is it much more happenstance than that?
Well, I do chain myself to a desk, and the joke with my friends and family, I have a black desk. It's this beautiful black wooden desk that I nicknamed Ebony, and that's kind of my mistress. I am chained to that desk while I write. But Jack London once said that you can't wait for inspiration. You have to go after it with a club. And that's true when you're writing. When you have I have a contract that says I turn in a book a year. By the way, it's fun to see all these friendly faces. I've got friends who've been readers for a long time. I've got my college boss when I went to the University of Southern California is in the audience. It's really nice to see everybody. So thank you all for coming. There's another, and it wasn't Dorothy Parker, but I think it was somebody in Dorothy Parker's group, in her circle, if you will, that said the key really is seat of pants to seat of chair. It's really that discipline, I think, that people who love what they do, and I do, and this is my favorite thing, is coming out on the road like this, because I get to see the people I work for. So all year I'm working, and this is my performance review. I come out with the product that I've been working on all year, and I get to see the people that make the best career in the world possible, and to say, how am I doing? Are you happy? Do you want to see more of this? What do you want me to do? So the hope is that the book does well. You can't know that. There's a big kind of leaping off the cliff and kind of closing your eyes and hoping. I forget, I just read this great quote that said, and it's hoping that you're going to sprout wings before you hit the ground. And that's true with every book. I'll have people say to me, well, you've written 17, what's your favorite? And for me, it's always whatever the next one is that I'm working on, because you have to fill your your tank, your personal reserve of energy. You have to fill it with rocket fuel to get you through that whole year to the next one. So.
Okay, so now we're going to throw this one away. It says, you've written 17 books. What's your favorite? But I'll throw another one. Faction. There's a word you've coined, Brad, called faction. I wondered if you'd explain it for the audience.
Well, actually, I use the term a lot, but it's a friend of mine who's coming here to the library, I believe on the 28th, Glenn Beck. So Glenn Beck is the one that coined the term faction. And so what I tell people is what I write is faction, where you don't know where the facts end and the fiction begins in my books. So what I like to do is to wrap the story in fact, in that's the jumping off point for use of force. So writers, so I have some buddies who are great thriller writers. Brad Meltzer is probably one of the dearest people you'll ever meet. And Brad says that, but great first name too, just a handsome, strong name. Brad Meltzer, it's just beautiful. But Brad says a thriller writer's job is to beat the headlines. And that's very true. Brad and I both got asked to be part of something called the Analytic Red Cell program at the Department of Homeland Security shortly after they opened their doors. They realized 9/11 had happened because there was a lack of imagination in Washington, D.C. So Brad got brought in, I got brought in, yeah, there still is a lack of imagination. But Brad got brought in, I got brought in, Michael Bay, the director of the Transformer movies, and a bunch of other people, because the federal government wanted to stay 3 to 4 steps ahead of the bad guys. So we were given all these kind of, I call it the Las Vegas of government programs, because what happens in the red cell stays in the red cell. I can't use any of it for my books. But this idea of trying to beat the headlines, to take the faction, to take these facts and create something that's not only going to be current and feel like it's about to happen on your front door, but so that you can read any of my books. You can read this one in 10 years and it'll still feel current and exciting and pulse-pounding. So you hope that it will do well and it'll resonate with people, but it's more of a kind of it's the art in the process of trusting and hoping that it's going to do well.
Got it. Now the book's been out in a couple of days, just a few days. And so there may be some in the audience that have read it. I'm not going to ask a single question to have you give away the ending, but if you can just kind of set the stage for us for use of force, is essentially what's it about?
So James Rollins, so I brought up Brad Meltzer and I got hooked on him because he's so handsome with that first name. And I mentioned James Rollins and Steve Berry, who are also dear friends of mine, and we kind of all started out at the same time. James Rollins has got this great joke where people say to him, where do you get your ideas from? So Stephen King jokes and says there's a post office box in Indiana, and if you send them $5 in a self-addressed stamped envelope, they'll send you an idea back for your next book. And James Rollins collects clippings throughout the year, and he drops into a box, he claims. And then when it comes time to write his next book, he shakes the box and says, "Oh, magic box, give me my next bestseller now." And he pulls out a clipping, and that's his idea. With the facts and the faction, with this book, I had heard about a raid on a terrorist stronghold overseas, and they had found a laptop. This is real. This is the fact in my faction for, by the way, is there a sign for faction? My wife signs. Have you? Have you made up? I'm asking. We don't know? Don't know if there's a sign for faction. Okay, I'm gonna have my wife watch this video because she's fluent in ASL. So. This laptop was discovered in this terrorist safe house, and they opened it. Looked like it just come out of a Best Buy, and they powered it up, and it appeared as if it had never been used. But when they drilled down into it, they found all of these horrific terrorist plots. Agora Hills wasn't on the list. That's good, Mr. Mayor. I'll tell you that right now. So we're good. We're safe there. But they were terrified with what they found, and not only did they find all of these horrific attacks, but they found justification from a particular cleric in Saudi Arabia, who the Saudis subsequently rolled up and put in prison. It was very interesting. But they never found the man that did the laptop, that had compiled all these. He had disappeared, and the CIA was looking for years for him. And I thought, wow, this is a really great way to do a jumping off for a thriller. But what I wanted to tie in something that I'd loved as a young boy when I'd read about World War II in an operation called Operation Mincemeat, where they had grabbed, I believe we did it with the Brits, and although I think the Brits were the ones that carried it out, where they grabbed a corpse and they chained a briefcase to the body and dumped it in the Mediterranean with the hopes that it would wash up in Italy, but that eventually it would lead the Axis powers astray with the information there. And I thought, okay, what about if in my book, this person the CIA has been looking for years, his body washes ashore in Italy and suddenly alarm bells go off at the CIA. We've been looking for this guy 3 years. We've got all this chatter that something's going to happen. And what was this guy doing off the coast of Italy? So that's kind of the lighting of the fuse, if you will, for use of force. So my main character, Scot Harvath, gets brought in to kind of retrace this bad guy's steps to figure out where he was and where he's going.
Got it. Scot Harvath. And I've never asked you this, Brad, but how should anyone pronounce Scott's last name?
So it's Harvath, and Harvath is actually named after a friend who's at the Department of Justice, who processes FISA warrants, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, to be able to listen in on people overseas, bad guys and things like this. So there actually is a real Harvath out there in D.C.
Now, can you ever imagine yourself writing a book someday without Scott as the protagonist? Or is it, nope, don't mess with a winning formula?
I can, but so I have done one. I did a spin-off series where Harvath appeared as kind of a bridge called the Athena Project, which is about an all-female Delta Force team. And so I could see doing it. I've brought up a couple of characters in other books, one named Chase Palmer and another one named Sloan Ashby, who are young, accomplished special operations people that for one reason or another, but they're named after my kids, actually. So that's their first name and middle name. And Scot Harvath is named after, as many people who have heard me speak before know, is named after my brother, who is a Scot with one T. So I could absolutely see doing it. But so many people love Harvath, and I love him. I mean, he's my alter ego the same way I've said that I know James Bond was for Ian Fleming and Jack Ryan was for Tom Clancy. So I would never kill him off or get rid of him, but I think that I want to keep challenging him. And if you've read my last couple of books, you'll see that there's some issues coming up for him, and I really touch on it in this book of, okay, where's he going next? Because I have friends that are dealing with that, where they've still got several years in them, and so does Harvath, of kicking indoors and going after bad guys. But I see some of these people who are so experienced, so talented, and they don't want them going out anymore. They want them to help work with the next generation that's coming up behind them, and it's a real challenge where these people have sacrificed everything for the country, and now they're being told the greatest sacrifice you can do is actually not going overseas. It's actually staying and helping tune up and impart all that hard-won experience and knowledge to the next generation of go-getters. So,
got it. Okay. I think you've been quoted as saying that Scott is your alter ego, and I wonder if has that been the case since Lions of Lucerne? Have you, from the very beginning, kind of imagined yourself in that role, or as the books and the character evolved, did you start seeing more and more of yourself, wishfully thinking, yeah, that would be me?
I do. It's funny. I have a friend who wrote a great thriller. It's going to be coming out from Simon & Schuster. I think he's out in the spring. His name is George Peterson, and George was a Navy SEAL. And I joke with George because George is smarter than I am. George wanted to be a Navy SEAL and an author. I wanted to be an author and a Navy SEAL. And he did it in the right order. He did Navy SEAL first, then became an author. I did the author first, and it's a little late for me to become a Navy SEAL. So I say George is much smarter than I am in that respect. But yeah, Harvath really is that alter ego, and so I spend a lot of time picturing and imagining how would I react in a situation like this. What would I do? And I spend a lot of time. You couldn't be an author without wonderful people willing to help you. So I pick up the phone, I text a lot, I ask a lot of questions. I know you've had Marcus Luttrell here. Marcus has become a good friend of mine. Marcus's twin brother actually helped on this book with some color details. I was able to text Morgan and ask him some questions and everything, and he was fantastic. And also, I ended up befriending the Rome bureau chief for the Daily Beast. She could not have been lovelier. She's written a ton about the connection between the Italian mafia and ISIS and how they are smuggling people into Europe in exchange. She calls them jihadi tomb raiders. So in places like Syria, in Iraq, in Libya, ISIS has been raiding all these UNESCO World Heritage sites and stealing these priceless artifacts and trading them with the Italian mafia. So they do that for guns and things like this that the mob will then move up into Europe along with smuggling terrorists in. So it's a fascinating connection, but I think some of the great color details I was able to get for this book came from the generosity of so many wonderful people, like Morgan Luttrell, like Barbie, the Rome bureau chief for the Daily Beast. It really is, I'm so fortunate that people have been so kind and so giving of their time with me.
Now, Brad, you touched briefly before on the evolution of Harvath's persona, and I wonder, is there something about him that you have purposely evolved him forward over the years, where you've said, I want to make him more this or more that, or is that just kind of happened by happenstance?
No, it's actually very conscious on my part. I tell everybody I'm a small business person, and I want my product to be better every single year because I want you all to know, gosh, he pours his entire heart into it. I'm working between books to get better as a writer and to deliver the best possible product that I can deliver. So the stuff about Harvath, when I go see James Bond, I want James Bond to be the same at the end of the movie as he is at the beginning. I don't want him out like basket weaving or suddenly very sensitive and all this stuff. Same with Indiana Jones. I don't want him, it's just, I don't want that. You get a lot of people, it's funny, Vince Flynn, and I don't know if anybody here got a chance to ever see Vince speak here. He did a fantastic job. You can watch it online. But Vince gave me a really good piece of advice. I was complaining to him about some of the reviews I was getting from the New York literary reviewers, and Vince says, why do you send him your book? I said, I thought we had to. And he goes, no. He goes, I stopped sending my books to him years ago. He said, it's like somebody who's in the business of reviewing four-door European sedans. They don't know what to do with a sports car. So, of course, this isn't War and Peace, but that's what they all expect it to be. So he goes, they weren't giving me good reviews. I stopped sending. Some advice can be so simple and so good.
Yeah.
And that was one of the best pieces of advice Vince gave me. The other great piece of advice Vince Flynn gave me was, he said, if you know you're batting a certain level and you're going to get into the Hall of Fame, don't start messing with your swing. He said, keep doing it, keep doing it. But what I wanted to do was, just for me, I wanted to learn more about Scot Harvath. I wanted to know more about what makes him tick, and so I wanted to reveal more about his personality. So I got into a little bit about what it was like for him growing up in Coronado with a father who was a SEAL, who didn't really talk with him that much, but they used to go see the Magnificent Seven together whenever the movie theater owner who loved the movie brought it back to the theater in San Diego. They would go, and his dad could recite every word, and he got to, and because the Magnificent Seven really resonated with me, particularly one point where there's a little Mexican boy that was complaining that his father wasn't tough enough to handle the bad guys that were coming in and harassing him. And you saw, I believe it was Charles Bronson said, don't ever disparage your father like that. Your father goes out and plants seeds in the earth, not knowing if there'll be enough rain and if he's going to have food to feed you and your family, and your dad's really that true hero. So that love that I had, my dad's a no longer active Marine, but we went through things at Camp Pendleton and all this stuff, and I thought, oh, this is kind of neat. Maybe I'll start to explore what makes Harvath tick. And several books ago, my wife noticed. I didn't tell her I was doing it. She's my first reader. I call her Zorro because she goes through with a red pen and does this in the manuscript. But she noticed, and she said, you know what? She said, I don't want to get too Harlequin on you, but she said, I always knew what Harvath thought because that's the way you wrote him. But now I'm starting to see what he feels, and it adds another layer of depth. And I found that men and women alike enjoy it because when we know kind of what's going on inside people, it makes them more human and we can relate to them.
Yeah. I knew these were brilliant questions because you keep raising these topics before I can ask you about them. So let me jump on one of those. You referenced Ian Fleming's James Bond. And my vision, Brad, is that you had to have grown up just absolutely loving the whole James Bond genre. And so the question is, did you think that influenced your interest in writing thrillers as you have? But second, what I'd like to know is whether you agree with what's happened to the Bond character over the years in terms of how he has evolved or not evolved.
So absolutely, I loved the James Bond books and the James Bond movies. I read John le Carré and Freddie Forsyth growing up. I really loved those great Cold War thrillers. Stephen King, in his book on writing, said that you should write what you love to read because that's where your passion is. And I take it a step further and say you have a mini PhD. So if you like thrillers or you like mysteries or sci-fi, you've read a lot of books in that genre. You know why certain books resonated with you and why certain authors got to a third book and it kind of clunked. It didn't do as well as the first two, but that author, she came back strong on the fourth one. So that's what I tell young, starting out writers, is that you should really, really take that advice that Stephen King said to heart and write what you love to read, because that's really where you're going to be successful. And as far as the evolution of the Bond character, I think the Daniel Craig reboot of that franchise was absolutely fantastic. I mean, the Brits lost their mind. A blonde James Bond. I mean, you would have thought they were getting rid of the monarchy. I mean, it was the gnashing of teeth and rending of garments, and he's been fantastic. He has put such a physicality in there, which is, and I love Roger Moore. I think he was such a great actor, so handsome, such a neat personality, but I like the Bond that has to think or use his hands to get out of situations. I didn't like all the gadgets and how no matter what he encountered, he had already been given the correct gadget by Q to get out of it. And they're fun and the little kind of witty rejoinders and everything, but I've really enjoyed the Daniel Craig reboot. I think he's been fantastic and was just the shot in the arm that the franchise needed.
You've been quoted as saying, you know, when I sit and write, I kind of write as though I'm imagining the words playing out in a movie. Mm-hmm. And so you and I talked about this really briefly before we came out here. Can you tell us whether or not you expect someday for Scot Harvath to appear in a movie or a television series or what have you?
So what John Hybush is doing by putting me on the spot like that up here is he's trying to scoop Access Hollywood. So I just sat for a big exclusive with Access Hollywood where I revealed that we have a screenplay done. I revealed the screenwriters' names, who are one of the most sought-after action screenwriting duos in Hollywood, and we have a director, which is huge. And our process has been different because I've worked with partners to put together a company where we wanted to go with financing on an equal footing with the studio and keep creative control. To work professionally with a studio, but to be able to, it's one of the things, listen, if the movie's no good, everybody's going to blame me. You know, that's the big deal. You're the writer. Don't let them do what they did to this guy's book. I mean, it's always the complaint you get is that Hollywood ruins the books. And so it was very important for me. Having a book turned into a film takes you to a new level. It's why Grisham's a household name. It's why Baldacci's a household name. They're not only great writers, but they've had great movies made. So that was important to me, is that we didn't just turn everything over to Hollywood. So Access Hollywood is supposed to sometime, probably a week from about when we're doing this interview, there's going to be something. So next week, follow me on Facebook and Twitter. I'm going to release the information. But yes, so we've got a great package put together. We're now looking at male leads to play Scot Harvath, and we are in discussions now on that equal footing with a couple of very big powerhouses in Hollywood about how do we take the books and do them justice and make the readers. That's the most important thing to me. There'll be tons of people that have never read my books that come see the movies, but it's really important for me that all of you who have been through this entire wonderful career I've had are happy. And we're going to take a 400-page book and put it into 2 hours, so things are going to change, but I'm going to change them. So you're going to get an authentic Brad Thor experience. It's going to be my fingerprints, and I'm going to be proud of it. So.
Okay, let's shift gears for a second. I've seen you a fair amount lately, Brad, on Fox, commenting on unfolding news events, most of them touching on domestic terror and foreign terror. And you said recently, you know, like it or not, the United States is looking more and more like Israel every day. And I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit.
So this has long been my fear, as we see attacks on soft targets, that we're going to end up under a constant state of siege, the way Israel is. The Israelis have, they're not complacent. They expect it, and they lead their lives. They don't let it define who they are, but they know that when they leave the house every day, something could happen. We saw the Maalat school siege in the 1970s, which really changed how Israel looked at protecting the most defenseless among them, the children, and what it does. So that's been my big concern, is that we're going to see more San Bernardinos, we're going to see more Orlandos, and even with the attacks in London, in Manchester, we keep hearing that these attackers were on the radar of law enforcement, whether it was the intelligence service or local law enforcement, and there wasn't enough to lock them up, to convict them. And my thing that I've been saying now is there's two things I think we need to do. Number one, I think for every attack, we need to publicly call for reforms in the Muslim world, particularly those places that have the least amount of freedom. So I really believe that we need to look at Saudi Arabia, and I don't care if there's a Saudi Arabian link to a terror attack, but one drop of Western blood gets spilled. I want women to have the right to vote. In fact, I want them to have the right to vote without drops of blood being spilled. But I think we need to use the energy of the outpouring of grief to not only say, to color our Facebook photos in the color of the British flag or the French flag. It's not going to fix it. So I think we need to put incredible pressure publicly, because it helps the reformers. This is what reformers in these countries need, is strong support and shining the light on what needs to be fixed. That's number one. Also, we've got ISIS investigations open by the FBI in all 50 states. We're drowning, as are our Western counterparts. We're drowning. We don't have enough resources to track everything down. So what I'd like to see done is we have zero tolerance when it comes to child pornography. If you're on the internet and you're surfing child porn, you're going to get convicted and you're going to go to jail. So with our partners in the Muslim community, you can ask anyone. I've asked my Muslim friends, who wants beheading videos? Nobody does. Christian, Muslim, agnostic, nobody wants beheading videos. And these sermons where you have these hate preachers like al-Waqi, who was in Yemen, that was calling for overthrowing Western governments, killing non-Muslims. These are kind of gateway drugs, if you will, for jihadism. They're on-ramps. And so what I want to do is, I don't want to have any more of these things happen where the FBI says, there wasn't enough there. Yeah, he was on our radar, but I'm the biggest civil liberties guy you're ever going to meet. But we have a zero tolerance policy for child pornography. I want to lower the prosecutorial bar for those on-ramps, those gateway drugs for jihadism, because we're going to have the support of the Muslim community that's going to agree, if you're surfing beheading videos, these terrible ISIS videos, there's no need to do that. So I want to make it easier to prosecute so that we can get these people before they get on the superhighway to jihadism. And if a guy sleeps on your couch during the planning of an attack, I want you to go to prison. Not for years, but for decades. Anybody that's involved at all, I want the price to be so high that these wayward young men won't drift into this stuff at all. And we have to bring that bar down, in my opinion. And that's what I'm recommending to people in DC, is that we respect civil liberties, but we look at this in a way that kind of separates it from religion and looks at it from a violence perspective. And that's why I thought that the analogy with child pornography was the best one that I could come up with as far as zero tolerance.
Yeah, well said.
Thank you.
You mentioned, Brad, that at least as far as we know, whether it's Agora Hills or Simi Valley, and maybe they're not real high, hopefully, on any terrorist lists at the moment. But I wonder, given all of your experience, embedding yourself with troops and talking to so many experts and just being so involved as you have been in the world of terrorism, is there any advice you would give to people in the audience and others watching about how they might make themselves and their families safer? Are there common sense or certain things that people should be doing now that the United States is, as a country, having to act more like an Israel?
Well, I have a lot of friends who are police officers, and they all say that when seconds count, the police are only minutes away. And that's not because they want it to be that way. It's just the nature of the game. We've been very fortunate that law enforcement has been able to thwart a lot of attacks. The Al-Qaeda attacks domestically that have been thwarted have been because the Al-Qaeda perpetrators have gone online looking for help and support, and the FBI has been able to set up stings and get them. There was a bad one in Chicago where the perpetrator was planting a bomb outside Wrigley Field at a Dave Matthews Band concert, and it was a fake bomb. ISIS knows that, and they're very sophisticated, and they put people in these encrypted chat rooms that the NSA has trouble cracking and all this kind of stuff. And there's one case that didn't get a lot of public attention, but this guy ran through a list of places that he was familiar with. So he was in the United States, and he was looking to hit, he wasn't going to leave his community to do his attack. So he was looking to do stuff at the gym even. He was like a 24-hour fitness kind of place, and he was going to do an attack there. He was going to wait till it was the busiest time. So the best thing people can do is to be aware, and this, see something, my wife jokes around at home, I have to let this out or I'm going to chuckle and you're not going to know why. My wife's got to think about the dishwashers not being unloaded, you know, and the dishes pile up in the sink, and her slogan is, if you see something, do something. That's the thing in our house. But, you know, we've heard so much since 9/11, if you see something, say something. And in San Bernardino, there was a neighbor who saw unusual activity going on in the garage of the perpetrators, and that turned out to be where they were building improvised explosive devices. And had that neighbor not been afraid of being painted as somebody who was anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, anti-guys who wear red shirts on Tuesdays, who was so afraid of being shamed for here's the deal. The best thing you can do is if you see something, say something. It's not up to you to determine whether that's, listen to your gut. We all have that, and that gut will never do you wrong. You turn it over to the police, that may be the one little data point that they need to solve something, to provide. Because I got to tell you this, with the people that died in San Bernardino and who were injured, that neighbor will never, ever be able to forgive himself for the rest of his life knowing he might have made a difference. So don't be that person. Be a good member of your community, and a good member of your community is someone who cares about everybody else. You want to be selfless. Don't worry if what you think anybody's going to say about you. Turn it over to law enforcement. Let them make the decision. That's probably the best thing. Keep your eyes open and turn it over to the police.
Very well said. Thanks, Brad. Thank you. You talked earlier about, okay, what's the right path, you know, author to Navy SEAL to author. You know, I remember, I don't know, it could have been just as few as 10 years ago, Brad, that you probably couldn't have found a book on the shelves that was openly written by a Navy SEAL talking about Navy SEAL activities. Mm-hmm. Now, you know, they're all over the airports and it's everywhere. And I just wonder if you have a view on that, because there used to be almost a code of silence, as it were, and I wonder if that has helped things or not helped things.
So I will tell you this. Number one, I am absolutely 100% not qualified to comment on what anybody in the Navy SEAL community does or doesn't do. I will say that right away. I have not earned that right, and I by no means claim any access to speak for that community. In fact, I got to meet Mouse McCoy, director, who did the movie Act of Valor with the real Navy SEALs as actors. And I remember Mouse saying to me, he said, you know, you and I have a very hard job, which is a lot of these guys can't speak for themselves, and they have a brand. And it's our job to make sure we don't do anything to damage that brand, to make sure that anything we do burnishes it. So a lot of books have been written, and what you will find is that in that community, they've been called the quiet professionals for a reason. And if you write a book, if you write a certain type of book, you run the risk of being kind of persona non grata in the community. That's happened with certain people, and there's other people that have written books, and it's been okay. But that's a great question. Like somebody like Marcus Luttrell, he wasn't giving away anything. He was telling his story about what happened. By the way, June 28th was I think it was the 12th anniversary of Operation Red Wing. So that was just last week, and I know that a lot of people took a moment and thought about Marcus and his teammates the teammates who passed, and then the folks that came in to rescue him. So that was just last week. But For me as an author, I will say this. I actually cite a couple of books written by Navy SEALs in the back of my book. So as these brave men, and there have been some women in different, in the intelligence world, some other spots, as they've come out of active service and they've written books, nonfiction, it's been great for me. It's been great because I learn things and then I'll call my guys and say, hey, you said there's one thing in here, and I brought up a detail point in the book. I said, I just read this, and did we talk about this? And a buddy of mine said, yeah, I told you that 3 years ago. We went on a raid in Kandahar, and that's exactly what happened. I'm like, wow. And he goes, Thor, we all know that. He said, anybody that's been there and operated. So the books have been wonderful for me as an author to have access to that information. But I think probably there is some friction with certain stuff that gets revealed because, and they've had it, there was a mini scandal with some SEALs who had taken weapons out and had gone and showed them to some people that were doing, I don't know if it was a Call of Duty game or whatever, and they got busted because they weren't supposed to be showing gear and stuff like that. The game's super authentic, and that's part of the reason why, because they got such good contacts in that community. But they tend to not like to have books written. That tends to be, so you're very right.
Yeah, for anyone interested, Brad's mentioned Marcus Luttrell a few times. We were honored to have such an incredible hero here. A year or two ago, he came with then Governor Perry of Texas at the time, and if you're interested, you can go to our website and watch Marcus's appearance here. It's really something special. With that, I'd like to segue and invite you all to ask questions of Brad. And if you would just raise your hand, as I said, and folks with microphones would be happy to put one in your hand, and we can go from there.
There, the first hand was this gentleman right in the back, right there.
With his hand up right there, yeah. Thank you.
I believe it was Vince Flynn who did a similar presentation, and he said that occasionally he will get called to the carpet. Like, this is a little too realistic here, son.
How do you know what you put in the book? Right.
Yeah, so has that ever happened to you?
It actually happened a couple days ago, as a matter of fact. I had somebody who's called me from D.C. who's in a very, very powerful position and said, you wrote about a particular interrogation technique in here. How do you know about this? And I said, well, wait a second, you mean I got it right? You mean I got it right? I'll call you back. So, that does happen. And it's interesting because one of the things that, as I did the stuff with the Department of Homeland Security, helping to kind of brainstorm and war game things, I had people ask me, not with that program, they didn't ask me, but I had people I knew in D.C. said, whatever you do, don't ever get a top secret security clearance. No matter how much you want to help, they said, you will have to give up your career. And I'm like, why? And they said, because once you have that clearance, all your books are going to have to be vetted. And then if you ever say or even invent something and it's true, you can have a little bit of a sticky situation on your hands. So I've always kind of steered away from the TS clearance. Not like they're falling out of the skies and I'm being offered them. There's a lot of them out there. But I've been able to kind of skirt having to do that with the times where I've done the red cell stuff.
Yeah.
So it hasn't been necessary.
Smart. Right here. Yes, right in the front. Thank you.
I would like your opinion on the current state of the CIA and the FBI, specifically all the leaks that have been happening. And to cynics, such as myself, it seems that these agencies have become somewhat politicized. And I'm wondering what your opinion is about that.
Well, thank you for your question. I think the most important takeaway is that the FBI and the CIA are filled with incredible American patriots. We are so blessed to have the brave men and women at both those organizations. They are incredible, incredible people. It's also the federal government, and there's calcification, and there are some managers at both places that are more concerned with the next promotion versus enabling and empowering the people who need to go out and do the dangerous work to do it. There have been some great books written on problems CIA agents have had and all this kind of stuff. So as far as the leaks are concerned, I hate leaks. And again, I'm a big civil liberties guy. I believe in free speech and all this kind of stuff. The stuff like Edward Snowden and Bradley Manning, I'm not a fan of that. I don't want, and now we've got what was her name, reality winner, the young lady that was just busted. I think at some point they really need, I think at some point they need to make a big example out of one of these 20-something-year-old kids, because if we can't keep secrets, we can't protect the nation. And I guarantee you, I know and really like Rand Paul a lot. If you had brought stuff to Rand Paul, he would have done something about it, okay? So this idea that you've got to run out and dump all these documents and put it out there, and the stuff with Snowden, who had a stripper girlfriend in Hawaii. I mean, they'd had the Russian fingerprints all over it. As a espionage and thriller writer, I mean, I'm like, I would have gotten thrown out of my editor's office for writing this story, right? So he's got this, it's Snowden with the glasses, the geeky tech guy with the pretty stripper girlfriend, and the first place he runs to for freedom is China. And then the Russians eventually go, okay, twist our arm, China, we'll take them off. So I don't like leaks. I don't like this stuff. And I'm not a big believer in this concept of the deep state that's been thrown around, like somehow there's kind of a shadow government in DC and everything. I think there's there's all these little fiefdoms, people want to protect them, and they're kind of out for themselves, and if leaking something strategically helps their short-term goal. But the thing is, we are a nation of laws, not of men and women. We have a peaceful transition of power, and it is as important to have handed over a fully functioning and trustworthy and strong federal apparatus to President Obama as it is to Donald Trump. That's very important. And so if you don't like it, surrender your job. Leave your job. But don't undermine the rest of the country and the safety and security of the country in the process. Yeah, and that's not okay. It's not okay at all.
No, well put, well put. Over here.
Hi.
You spoke about the movie character. As a writer, if somebody, we all have a vision in our head of the character, the main character.
Yep.
So we see that person in a certain way. But now we're going to put somebody on a screen. How does that change, first of all, the dynamics for you as a writer, to continue with that character? Because now we all have a singular vision of him. And how does it change for all of us in terms of how that character moves forward?
Well, it's a great question. So I'll give you a couple of examples of who has I've looked at and I've said, you know what, that's how I see Scot Harvath, and that actor would be great. So one of my favorite actors made a huge career mistake, because he could have been with me, but he went over to Clancy. And his name is Chris Pine, and he played Jack Ryan, Shadow Recruit, in a Clancy adaptation. Now, Amazon, by the way, has bought the Jack Ryan franchise, and they're going to be doing Jack Ryan stuff, so I don't know what that does with Chris Pine, but I love Chris Pine. And so when I close my eyes, I see, Chris Pine was one of the potential actors that I saw. But I'll tell you who I'm a big fan of, who is a great actor. We just saw him again recently in, I think it was the most recent Fast and Furious, is Clint Eastwood's son, Scotty Eastwood. Just a very smart guy, great family. I mean, that Eastwood name up on a marquee it would be fun for me. He's a great American. So Scotty Eastwood is someone that I think, because I don't know what's going to happen with Chris Pine, if we end up, there may be I don't know how that works with somebody who's already been in another franchise. I mean, these actors move around and do different things, but those give you two examples. So it is tough for me, because I am so connected and have a view of Harvath, but what I've told my Hollywood partners is, got to be more than just a pretty face. So you look at somebody like a Matt Damon. Now, could I sit down and have dinner with Matt Damon? Absolutely. I think I could have a lovely dinner with Matt Damon. Would we be best of friends till the end of days? I don't know. I know that he's got a view of the world and mine, and I love that people have different views. But Matt Damon is so smart. And that comes through, and he's a great actor. He's a fantastic actor. And that's what I've said to the people in Hollywood. It can't just be a pretty face. That intelligence. And so I love the Jason Bourne character. And by the way, I like to tease anybody involved with that movie, because when Matt Damon goes to the safety deposit box and finds his passport, it's my exact birthday on the passport. So I say, even Jason Bourne wants to be Brad Thor. That's why I said, took the same...
That's great.
But that intelligence is a big factor. That's really important for an actor, for me.
Thank you. Over here.
Fellow Trojan, right?
Ah, yes, sir. Fight on.
What year?
Graduated in 1992 from USC.
67. I noticed in the book Act of War, which is several years ago, that you created a president that's kind of similar to the one that we have now. That you said you have an active president who does things, not just says things. And I just wondered where you came up with the character.
You know what? I couldn't have scripted a better question to be asked at the Reagan Library than that one right there. That president, President Paul Porter, was based on, I make a lot of jokes with my friends, and one of the jokes that was floating around was, how do we reanimate President Reagan and bring him back? And so for me as an author and being able to create that fictional world, that is a younger, in his 50s, Ronald Reagan. That's exactly who that President Paul Porter is, somebody who was, I read an interesting article years ago that kind of compared how different politicians spent their vacations, whether you were lying on a beach or water skiing versus clearing brush at your ranch. And so that president that I created in that book was very much, in my mind, a Ronald Reagan in his 50s. And so that's what that was. It was acta non verba, actions not deeds, and putting a marker out there and saying, you know what, we're going to do this, we're going to get it done. Because President Reagan, I was always so inspired. I wasn't old enough to vote for him. By the time I was old enough to vote, it was for H.W. Bush. But I remember we used to watch President Reagan speaking from the Oval Office in our house. And it was a really, really big deal to be a young man and to come of age under President Reagan. So that is an homage of mine to President Reagan.
Yeah,
Great question.
Yeah, very neat. I'm thinking that we're going to have to change one of our exhibits upstairs on this, Brad. Yes, right over here.
One of the questions I have is, with the technology being what it is today and how it's changing so fast, one of the things I love about your books is I can pick up your first book and I don't know when it was written because you don't rely on the technology factor. Is it difficult not to, I don't know, use some of the things maybe you hear from people that you are a step ahead of probably most people in that category? Is it hard not to use too much of the technology since that's the world we live in?
That's a great question, and it is tough. There are the technology is always changing. I want the books to be evergreen, so I don't want to date it. But there are some things that you can't avoid. Like in use of force, I deal with a particular drone issue, which is really interesting because I talk to people all the time that are in some of the darkest corners of the world, and I say, okay, well, tell me what goes wrong. That's what I want to put in the books, not just what goes right, but what goes wrong. What were some of the big things? And I found that in one particular area in the book that I'm in, what the drones can do is all dependent on where they get launched from. So a drone that launches from Tunisia is different than a drone that launches from Sicily, is different than a drone that launches from a ship in the Mediterranean. They all have their kind of own rules of engagement. And I was fascinated by this. And I said, well, what happens if you need it? You've got this drone and they're not. So it brought back to mind the Benghazi situation and what happened in Benghazi, because one of the things that angered me the most about Benghazi was that they didn't launch jets from Italy. My thing would have been break the sound barrier and break every window over Benghazi. Fly those jets, break every piece of glass because of the sonic boom. And they didn't launch them because there was no place for them to refuel in Libya. I said, I don't care if they refuel them or not. I said, run them till they're dry like Bic lighters and dump them in the Med, and the pilots can eject and we'll come pick up the pilots. We can build more planes. I'll even write a bigger tax check to help build more planes, but we can't build more Americans. So that kind of craziness that happened in Benghazi, that bureaucracy, I wove into this book, particularly on that technology issue. So I've taken your question and kind of turned it around, but that's the most recent encounter I've had with tech and how it works in the books.
Okay, yes, over here.
When you have embedded yourself with our troops, what have you learned that you've used?
Well, this is another great, so I've been dying to make this hashtag joke all day, and I didn't know if I was going to. So I did it once, and I went to Afghanistan, and it's funny, today they've got a national day for everything now, but I was on Twitter tweeting out that I was going to be here, and I noticed it was National Fried Chicken Day. Hashtag National Fried Chicken Day. Best fried chicken I've ever had was in Jalalabad, Afghanistan, when I went with this team. One of the most interesting things for me, the Afghan people were fantastic. I mean, that was an incredible experience for me. And next to being a doctor, the most respected profession that you could be in Afghanistan was to be a writer. So that was amazing as I met these people over there. The big thing, and if you go, and you really should look at the Marcus Luttrell interview that was done here, but the Pashtuns over there have a code called Pashtunwali, where if you're invited into their village, they take responsibility for you, and they'll fight to the last man to keep you alive because you're their guest. Try to get somebody on the 405 to help you change a tire on a Friday afternoon when everybody's scooting away. So I got to learn a lot of human things. So while I was interested in kind of what the guns were that, you know, that the guys were using, and there were boxes of grenades and things like this, and we didn't wear sunglasses because that pegged you as a Westerner at a distance, and we kind of dressed a little bit like the Afghans and things like this. It was the human stuff. So not only the Taliban, and they would say there was kind of like capital T Taliban and small T Taliban, but it was interesting for me to see just the people on this team. You know, there's one guy who was having trouble with his wife, and she kept calling him, and it's, you know, he couldn't, you need to compartmentalize, and he finally had to say, listen, we'll deal with this when we get home, but I can't be taking these calls now. I need to keep my head in the game. So that, for me, was the most interesting thing, is to see they don't stop being husbands. They don't stop being sons or brothers. They continue to be those things, but they have to put it in a box, and they have to be members of a team, and they have to be focused. And it was like being, I'll tell you what it was like. It's like being with professional athletes. That focus in that absolute dedication to the mission, and professional athletes doesn't even do it justice. It was more mental than physical, and that blew me away. And if you talk to anybody like a Marcus Luttrell, or you go down to Coronado and you see the guys that make it through Hell Week in SEALs, they will tell you it's a mental thing, and that's what blew my mind, how hyper intelligent they were and hyper focused.
Yes, right here.
Hello.
Hello.
My husband is an avid reader. He probably reads 2 books a week. Yeah.
Love them.
Yeah. So I wanted to give you a suggestion. We were at a used bookstore about a decade ago, and I found one of your books because it looked like this.
Oh, neat.
And so as a suggestion, because I'm hyper-patriotic, and I think that Scot Harvath is also like America, and
Yep.
we're all here at the Reagan Library, America, right? And that maybe if you put a little bit more like red, white, and blue on the cover, you could attract a few more, I don't know, wives of readers or something that they
Great suggestion.
just for new people.
No,
just
and
for new
thank you.
people.
It's an absolutely wonderful, wonderful suggestion. I agree with you. That's great stuff. And it's good. This is why I love coming on the road. We get this great feedback, and so thank you. It's a woman who works with me, and we've talked about this before. Where we've done focus groups and what people like to see, and that immediately, when you see that red, white, and blue, it immediately says, okay, this is my kind of book. So.
Great. Well, we are exactly at 7 o'clock and 11 seconds. So our
Tight
time's up,
ship
and
here at the
yeah.
Reagan Library. I think President Reagan would be impressed. By the way, real quick, so I live in Nashville right now, and I'm sorry we're going over, but Art Laffer, who worked with President Reagan, lives in Nashville, and any time I get invited to a dinner and Art's going to be there, I cancel everything to go, because he always reveals one Reagan story nobody's heard. And the last dinner I went to with Art Laffer, he had the best line. He said that they had finished a meeting in the Oval Office, people were kind of milling around, and President Reagan looked at him and he says, don't just stand there, undo something.
That's great. Well, I know we could go for hours, I'm sure, but what may go for hours is I know a lot of people here, hopefully every single one of you, has the idea to go upstairs with us and and to meet Brad and to have him sign 1 or 20 of your books. So, with that, I just want to say again, Brad, it's just a real treat. We've had you here 5 years ago. I'd like to have you here every 5 days, and I know everyone here would as well. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, John.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Thank you.
Just
Thank you for that. What a
No problem.